Good morning. Uh, First of all, I'd like to reach out to a friend, a brother, Dennis Harris. Check him out on Facebook. He's really good. He couples beautiful, meaningful photographs with words of wisdom, both his own and those of others, that echoes his thoughts. And he asked me maybe a sharing devoted to my path, my experiences, might be in order. And in that spirit, here we go. My first teacher, Paramahamsa Yogananda, the self-realization fellowship that he founded, the first Hindu yogi that came and settled in the West, took up residence, long-term residence. Beautiful. He has a beautiful center in the hills above Malibu. If you ever have a chance, it's well worth a visit. Quite the sanctuary. But Hinduism and its myriad of intricacies first became the foundation of my practice. And this early discovery of Paramahamsa's autobiography of a yogi that was on my mother's bookshelf, that I discovered at 10, 11, or 12 and was enthralled with, led to my acceptance, my recognition as Paramahamsa to be my first teacher, even though he had moved on from the physical plane. Nevertheless, the resonation, his teachings touched me. And there was elements of magic, occupation of two separate bodies simultaneously, and a lot of these kind of revelations about his previous teacher. But really what I got from him is the acceptance, the recognition of your spiritual heritage, your lineage. And with each teacher, the teacher of his teacher, and the teacher of his teacher's teacher, and the teacher of his teacher's teacher, the lineage appealed to me, and I studied each one of his teachers. And then at some point in my life, I found Zazen, the Japanese incarnation of Zen teachings. Where I lived in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu, in the city of Honolulu, there was a beautiful valley, Kalihi Valley, and I knew of a dojo, a place of teaching in the Zen tradition, Zazen. So I gravitated towards it, and I started experiencing Zen in a formal setting. And there was many things that immediately appealed to me. First, in this tradition that I found, they didn't cloister, my Roshi, my teacher, my source of inspiration and knowledge, was a regular fellow. During the weekdays, he worked, he had a family. He fully participated in the society around him and came to nightly teachings, weekend teachings, dressed in a gi, no robes. He just wore a martial arts gi with a white belt, I noticed, and shared the teachings. And amongst the teachings, first of all, at that point, I didn't know about the Renzai or Soto Zen. I certainly didn't know the differences. But I happened to stumble into a Renzai Zen organization. And during our meditation practices, the Roshi would stress posture, stress our attitude, the way we approach the meditation room had a specific protocol. There was bowing involved. Not unexpected, being aware, having already traveled to Japan, being aware of their bowing tradition. But this was the bowing to the room. And in this bowing, it was about surrendering, letting go of the rubbish that we brought to us, with us, surrendering that, trying to at least lower the volume on the monkey mind, the mind that was constantly, apparently aimlessly wandering, that was so full of chatter. So there was protocol, a bowing, slippers placed in a certain place. Meditation, as you join the group, the meditation periods would start out at 20 minutes. And as you were able to sit rigidly still, because this was an inherent part of the practice, stillness, straight up the spine. The periods of meditation would increase until it embraced an hour of sitting. And that hour has pretty much remained with me as an optimum amount of time in meditation. Of course, I've experienced spontaneous extensions of this hour to several hours, if not days. But I discovered here that effective time for meditation, at least for me, was 1 hour. And that has stayed true. And this organization, dojo, martial arts studio that encompassed meditation, they had people that had devoted themselves to at least a 3-year period of time, made a commitment. And it was one of these participants that was about 2 years into his 3-year obligation who stressed to me that meditation had to be like a war. Like you had to be like a warrior. He often told me, if you're not sweating, you're not meditating. Because my practice in meditation before this had been kind of a just peaceful om, just a peaceful, relaxed involvement. So this is a new way of thinking. And as it was called a dojo rather than a temple, martial arts was part of the teachings. And to go back a little bit, the Roshi that was really in charge of the dojo never was as strict disciplinarian as the person who was training to become a Roshi. That was the ultimate goal. First, after 3 years, it would be decided if you were advanced, if you learned enough to be accepted into the order, the Renzai order, as a monk. And then if you continued your studies and your journeys, there was the possibility that you could be chosen to be a Roshi. But as I was to learn, sometimes the people studying, the people just recently committed were the most harsh. So my Roshi never said I needed to sweat during meditation, but he was concerned about posture. And after they've observed you in meditation, once you're acknowledged and have accomplished the procedures, the approach to the meditation room, the bow, the quiet filing in the room. The room was quite sacred. It had a very powerful vibration, and no small talk was acceptable behavior. So after a period of time, and when the Roshi observed you, he would assign you a martial art. Which area of study? And at that time, kendo, the sword or stick, type of judo or jujitsu, kind of a wrestling thing. And kyushu, archery, were the three, as I knew at that time, the three choices that the Roshi would have. You weren't allowed to choose. This was totally based on the Roshi's choice. So when it came time to be assigned art, a martial art to train and pursue, he simply pointed to a line that stretched across, a straight line that went across the dojo, the actual martial arts practice room. And you know, people on one side doing kendo, hitting each other with a stick, which had a lot of appeal to me. Kyushu, the artist outside shooting arrows, which appealed to me because I felt that I was lacking the ability to focus well. I was always more open, and I wondered if I needed to find balance by closing this, by focusing on a target. And all he did, the Roshi just pointed the line, says, walk. And he gave me some few brief instructions about one foot in front of the other, da, da. Very, even though he was a ABJ, an American-born Japanese, who English was his first language, he utilized very few words. So his instructions were always minimal as far as vocalization is concerned. He just demonstrated, and then he asked me he left me to my own devices to fool with the balance and try to get the rhythm, one foot carefully. Mindfulness is what he was sharing with me, mindful of each step. And there was a focus there because I had a tendency to be a little bit dyslexic, and my relationship between my mind and my body was always a little off somehow. I wasn't at home in my body, if I could say that. I wasn't like a natural-born dancer. My rhythm was suspect. And I suspect now, at this point in my life, that that's what he recognized. And I was the only one that was walking. And this went on for almost 2 years. And I like to say that I became an expert in this Zen walk, as I learned it was known. A walk that puts you in the rhythm of your surroundings. A walk that an adept could utilize, a martial art adept could utilize to walk through a crowd, and the crowd would almost part, just as the waters parted in that biblical tradition, and then close back on the pursuing enemy. Again, never mastered this walk. And the Roshi would share to me over this amount of time that this is the foundation for all martial arts. The fundamental balance. The fundamental comfort in the body. And along with meditation, martial arts, Cha Dao, the art of tea, the tea ceremony, and Ikebana, or flower arranging. Renzai Zen, after all, was the tradition of the samurai, and the samurai needed to include the precision of flower arranging, the art of the tea ceremony, in addition to the martial arts training, which included meditation. So my Hindu days were behind me. It was just too complex and too complicated and too many divisions. And Zen, the simplicity of Zen, the seeming simplicity, and of course we know in the simple lies the most difficulty. But I didn't know that at the time. But I embraced this study. And Renzai, I want to, my limited understanding and the differences between Soto Zen, the other major school of Japanese Zazen. Soto Zen, instead of sitting in a circle facing inwards as we did in Renzai Zen, they turned around and focused outwards. So it'd be a circle, but in Soto Zen, everybody sat in a circle facing outward. And Rinzai Zen had different ideas about enlightenment. Is it immediate enlightenment, or is it take a long process? So, another area of division between the two schools. But I fell into Rinzai Zen. That's just what the universe provided for me. And I've never had an opportunity to go to a Soto Zen center to really delve into any differences. Because from very early on, differences were far less important to me than similarities. So after practicing in Hawaii, I was relocating to Japan, ostensibly to teach English as a second language. But as most things, we never know where we'll end up. But I ended up in a Rinzai Zen temple in Kyoto, Japan. And almost fell in to my practice there. And I want to take this opportunity to share one commonality in my Zen experience was that the language, other than the Roshi that gave me my foundation, the language of instruction was not mine. In Japan, it was all Japanese. And everything that's involved with being Japanese was taken for granted. I was the only gaijin, the only foreigner at my temple. And quite honestly, I never knew what they were talking about. My Japanese is skoshi, just a little bit. So little to really be of no import. So I was surrounded by very Japanese circumstances, and most of it was beyond my pay grade. I could sense the subtleties, but without the language, it's hard to grasp the whole hierarchy. I knew my position was at the bottom, and I was fine with that. And while others were reading sutras in Japanese, I was meditating more or less on my own. But I learned to practice walking meditation, lying down meditation. And what I really took away with 2.5 years or thereabouts in the Rinzai temple, what I took away from that experience was my only opportunity to be cloistered, to be in a protective. We were fed. It was a minimal feeding, but I was never very interested in sensual pleasures. But we were protected. We were in a cocoon, a safe environment. And the only reason I was allowed in this, considered to be part of this Rinzai temple as an outsider, was that my Roshi sent a letter to the abbot, to the head, recommending that I be accepted into their order and their process. But this cloistering, this safety, this safe net, flew in the face of my previous practice when I mentioned that my Zen group, my Rinzai Zen group, had a completely different philosophy than this cloistering, this getting together, the safety of like-mindedness. And in that tradition, which really resonated with me is that you had to be a monk without a robe. You were forced out into the world. And you had to participate in the world as a monk without the costume, without people recognizing, oh, he's a monk. People had to see it or experience it in a different way. But this cloister group offered in Kyoto offered me an opportunity to remain in the group forever, practicing diligently, observing the protocols to my best of understanding. But it didn't take me 2.5 years. I knew quite early on that it wasn't for me, this cloistered, protected life. I needed to be out and about, but I wanted to give it a real shot. So 2.5 years is reached my limit of ability to remain in this community. And then I followed the rest of my, after this, I was mid-30s at this time. So the next 20 years, I pretty much followed the tradition that I was familiar with. And at such time, I ended up in Taiwan many years later. I guess I came to Taiwan at 59, and I started finding out about Chan Buddhism, the Chinese Zen. Chan is their word for Zen. And I looked to the first patriarch. In Chinese, we call him Dhammo. In the rest of the world, he's Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma left India. I believe Bodhidharma was like the 26th patriarch in the Indian tradition, somewhere thereabouts, close enough, and became the first patriarch in China. So this guy, this Persian-looking man in China, really interested me, and he started the roots of what's the famous Chinese martial arts? Here we go, drew a blank. Anyway, it'll come to me. And this practice of, he saw the monks in really horrible physical condition, and he knew that it took a balance. So he encouraged people to practice. And Wei Ning, I believe he was the 6th patriarch. His teachings really resonated with me. So I became very involved in Chinese Zen in Chan, because I was in Taiwan. And again, even after years in Japan, my Japanese was minimal. And after many, many years, much to my chagrin, my Chinese is equally poor. Nowhere near capable. I'm capable of the greetings, and that's about it. I can understand in the Indian a little bit. I can listen much more than speak. But my first teacher, I was introduced to my first teacher here in Taiwan, and he was a Chan Buddhist adept. and didn't speak English, as I mentioned before. So the commonality in my practice has always been that limited by language if you look at it one way. But the other side that I looked at was words had no real import. So not understanding them perhaps was a bonus. So I stayed with this teacher for 6 years. He's the first person that I recognize as a teacher, and he took me to the abyss. He took me to the cliff and asked me to jump. And so I did. This trust, this banishment of fear was perhaps the biggest takeaway from this 5.5, 6 years with my teacher. And I always knew that a teacher's role, he fulfilled the teacher's role to take you to the limit, take you to the boundaries. The rest is up to you. And I guess 1 year prior to my permanent awakening, which my teacher had predicted at that time, 1 year after my intrusive heart surgery, I went through the process of surrender, the process of forgiving myself, forgiving those around us, and acceptance of my limitations, that most everything was intrinsically unknowable, and becoming okay with that. But here the process was when surrendering meant giving up all my preconceived ideas, my previous practices, just giving it up, putting the bag of shit down finally. And this became the seeds of my new practice, embracing ordinariness and simplicity, looking for unity, not taking myself so seriously, opening. And here was the real journey from there to here.